Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the innovation stage. We're going to kick off with our intro panel, Ports, Platforms, and Partners, Rethinking Urban Freight Systems, and I would like to welcome our moderator, Riyad Sicharan.
Morning.
Morning.
Okay, good morning. Welcome everyone. So today we're going to run this panel informally. What I'd like to do just quickly to kick us off is have everyone on the panel introduce themselves briefly. I'll start with me to make it simple. My name is Riyad Sicharan. I lead the pilots effort at the Miami-Dade Innovation Authority. Pleasure to be here.
Kelly Porter, I'm Assistant Director for Transportation Public Works City Fort Worth, over Smart Cities and Transportation Project Development.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gustavo Grande, and I'm the Head of Innovation for Port Miami.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Thibaut Castagne. I'm the founder of Vianova. We are a mobility data analytics startup working with public authorities and infrastructure operators.
Wonderful. So this panel is ports, platforms, and partnerships. So what I'm going to do is ask the panel to give a brief one-statement kind of opening consideration or remark as we kick off. And we're going to go always left to right.
Sure. Sure. I think our biggest considerations, correct, in Fort Worth, are going to be kind of two things. Number one, our port is largely privately held in some ways. It's public-private partnership, so that brings some interesting challenges, but also perspectives on the direction we want to go in, balancing those different interests. And then number two, I'd say that we're also just now getting into the frame of work thinking about our curb space and drayage when it comes to urban freight coming into the city.
In our case, I don't know if you noticed, but Port Miami is located here in the heart of downtown. We are a man-made island with 520 acres of space, and we manage around 1 million TEUs, containers of 20-foot containers, and 8.6 million passengers, which positions us as the cruise capital of the world. And what that means, in any given cruise day, we have around 160,000 passengers coming in and out. So space and traffic congestion and how we integrate with the city is a big consideration for us.
And I'm going to speak as let's say the platform, the tech platform. So we generally sit between the data providers, whether they are hardware, sensor, or basically like connected vehicle, OEMs, telematics data, and the public authorities. So role is typically to make sense of the data and try to tell a story, and generating basically insights out of this data. Which can be very diverse, of very diverse quality, input, and sometimes hard to contextualize.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to kick off again with a question to Kelly. We've talked a little bit about this, and what I'd love for you to talk about is two things. One, kind of geography of the areas that you manage, and you mentioned earlier kind of how urban sprawl, for lack of a better word, is impacting operations. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So our situation's somewhat unique in that, we have an inland port which is made up of, it's the Alliance Smart Port, which is made up of the Alliance Airport, Perot Field, which is a freight exclusive airport, does do some general aviation, a massive BNSF railroad terminal out there as well, with a lot of movement in between the land side, the rail side, and then also the air side, with our airport, and then also I-35 W managed lanes. It's back when that was built, it was all out on the fringe of the city, and now the city's starting to grow around it. So it's a bit almost the opposite of what Gustavo was dealing with, where you had a port in the city. We had a port, and then the city kind of grew around that port in a kind of a post-war age around automobiles. So it's created some additional, what we thought was wild urban prairie that could expand on. It's now becoming more and more constrained, and so we're seeing automation as being one of the only ways that we can actually do more expansion in that area without totally building a whole nother essentially a city out on the north side or whatnot. And so we've had the luxury of being able to kind of plan for that fairly methodically over the decades, in very tight partnership with Hillwood, which is the developer of that area. But what that has done is it's given us some opportunities to think about, hey, where do we consider truck parking in this area to keep some of the bigger trucks out of coming deeper into the city? I don't have to build a tunnel because my port's not near my downtown. It's 20 miles to the north. Although in the future, as fast as we're growing, we may be talking about bigger infrastructure out in that area to do. But a lot of it's going to be make sure that we're able to maintain our capacities out there as consumer habits continue to grow and people want more things delivered. Being able to have proper drayage points in that area to go from bigger trucks that may be coming from the coast onto smaller vehicles that may actually do deliveries inside the city or whatnot. So that's actually a big opportunity for us. But we really are kind of at a point where we know automation is the only way that we can really expand it, being smarter, using data, using technology to better give us that path forward as we continue to grow that area, live jobs, and then of course with supplying the people and goods, people and businesses in our city.
Thank you for that. So, Gustavo, I'd love for you to talk about the Port of Miami and some of the challenges there, right?
Sure. Like I mentioned, our closest competitors manage similar numbers in an area that is 3 to 4 times the space, the land that we have. So, and we only have 2 points of entry, meaning the bridge and the tunnel, and sometimes 1 point of exit. Why is that? Because if there's traffic in I-395, the main avenue that actually it goes from Miami Beach to I-95, so, and the tunnel gets congested, those vents, we have 22 vents inside the tunnel, and they don't work they have to stop at a second in order to get, they have to rest. They cannot work without resting. So if that happens, you can imagine that if there's traffic inside the tunnel and the vents stop working, then people will die out of CO2, right? Intoxication. So that brings a big challenge in terms of not only traffic congestion, but then that starts delaying cargo operations as well. And then that also influences public when they start recording videos of how congested is the port, and then I'm losing my flight because I cannot get to the airport. Then what happens is that people start walking right from the terminals to the city, and that it's a hazard because there could be an accident, and we don't have a proper pedestrian ways. So how do we actually are able to capture all that data and develop short-term, mid-term solutions in order to mitigate risk? PR type of scandals and situations, but also we don't piss our clients, our cruise lines, and they don't go somewhere else, and we lose that competitive landscape that we currently have.
Thank you. Thibault, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about why cities look at the startup that you founded, like why they look at it. I know you mentioned micromobility, but it'd be wonderful to get your perspective on that, please.
Yeah, so I'm gonna specifically talk about freight now. So in general, I mean, I'm gonna give 3 examples actually. One at the city level, one at the regional level, and one work that we've done actually with an infrastructure operator. So for freight, you generally have 2 ways to capture data. One that is through telematics units that are basically being installed actually in most of the vans and trucks that you see out there. So those ones basically give you very accurate GPS traces. And the other one basically is camera-based detection. So at Vianova, we can capture basically both types of data streams. But what we've been using a lot actually at the macro level is telematics data. So I'm going to give a quick example. Actually, we worked with the Paris region and the airport, Charles de Gaulle. And we essentially basically, like, there's a lot of choke points basically entering into the city of Paris. And so we looked at aggregating actually all the telematics data that essentially like we bought out there from the largest telematics providers, and looking at the different choke points or entry points basically of freight flow coming into Paris. and helping the city of Paris understanding basically like how to optimize those routes with the region and the transport authority. We also worked with the city of, actually the parking agency of Montreal. As sort of any city, they, the sort of double parking or illegal curb usage has been a problem for them, both actually on the bike lanes and on the bus lanes. So similarly, basically, like we aggregated telematics data, specifically pick-up and drop-off, with basically a filter on bus lanes and bike lanes so that they could actually prioritize their enforcement team, so prioritize basically the tasks for the enforcement team to specifically focus on areas with high double parking on cycling lanes and bike lanes. And maybe I can talk about the Port of Galveston, but happy to hear about what you guys are doing at Port of Miami first, yeah.
Brilliant. So maybe what I'd love to kind of unpack now is, you've talked about automation, Kelly. I know, Gustavo, you're doing software and hardware pilots. Can we talk a little bit about how technology informs kind of efforts at ports, the city kind of component, the MPO component? It'd be wonderful to get some perspective there, please.
Okay, so we have unions at the port, so we have to be very mindful on how we frame and contextualize our technologies. We have to make sure that technologies is actually serving us versus us serving the technology. So based on that, we have to be very mindful when we use words like automation. Instead, we make sure that whatever we implement, it's all about supporting our staff in order to complement what they do. But in that same process, we also need to make sure that the technologies that we're using have a specific use case. So I think in our case, we started with MDIA running a pilot for cargo visibility. And then all of a sudden, when we framed the challenge and we selected the companies, we realized, and we started doing the due diligence, we realized that, oh, wait a second. Cargo visibility is nice to have, but actually, if we don't put internal order in terms of the traffic congestion and what that's going to mean in the near future, because the cruise ships are just getting bigger, the post-Panamax vessels are just getting bigger as well. So we need to actually go from a nice to have to a need to have, and that's how we transition from cargo visibility to traffic congestion. And then how to take advantage of that transition in order to include operations, planning, cargo development into the equation, and see that with the implementation of technology, by collecting data, analyzing that data, and what Thibaut mentioned, like how do you contextualize, right? How do those data tells the story and provides them with insights that they can actually implement? That's when you start seeing the change management that is required in order for them to adopt that technology and start being more comfortable with the word technology, automation, or anything like that.
Yeah, when it comes to certain things, especially like we were talking about AVs or whatnot, the state pretty much just preempted us, so we kind of have to just be prepared to allow for those things to happen. So in Fort Worth, we're wrapping up our city's first ever master transportation plan, which has a sizable freight and technology component in it. Like I said, we don't necessarily operate the port directly, but a lot of the roads within the port are public roads, either on the city side or things we do to work with TxDOT on there. So our main goals are economic development. I'd say our priority goes safety, then it's maintenance, then it's economic development, really in that order. So we have a system of managed lanes, not too dissimilar what you see out there on I-95 and other places that we're coordinating with that private concessionaire with some AV companies as well to do more platooning along those managed lanes, because we have a lot of freight coming not only from the ports on the Mexican border, but also the ports on the coast in Texas. So we're using that as a way to kind of platoon trucks to get into our port area. So that kind of goes into a bit of the congestion part. The safety component with that is that, well, we have to be able to also demonstrate to the public that it's also going to be safe. So we're working with a company called Cavnu, which I think has also been purchased by Contour Engineers now, to actually do proper, like, hard infrastructure on an arterial that goes directly into our freight area. that will have autonomous technology along it. If you've been I-94 in Michigan, outside Detroit, there's a kind of a test track on there. We'd be using the same technology to platoon those trucks off the freeway or off the toll managed lanes into the port to be able to get more roadway space available. In addition to that, we have a system of weather sensors that we have set up in this area to provide data back to AV trucks and other users to help enhance safety or whatnot. And then recently, we just adopted a ordinance to allow for heavier freight than normal in a certain zone in that area. And it toggles with a private bridge that was built by the private developer in that area that helps keep that heavier freight between the rail yard and the air side basically contained. And in that zone, there would also be allowed use of hostlers that would allow for smaller drayage connections in that general area. And we had to do a lot of ordinance updates or whatnot on that. But the next probably thing that we'll probably have come out of that is probably sensors that look at, that we're going to be exploring, that look at the heaviness of those loads as they go onto our roads. So make sure we're maintaining that area. And then I'll add one other thing. We also, on the freight side, are using a system called TrainFo that helps us manage some of the at-grade crossings as we've gotten more freight coming in this area, has this spillover impact into the city in which I can't build a bunch of $40 million grade separated crossings fast enough. And so we have to use that technology to manage those crossings as we're enhancing access into the port.
So this one is for everyone. And Thibault, I'd love for you to start. What I'd love for us to comment on is this tension that we see between people and technology. So for example, we who are on the cutting edge of kind of adopting software and hardware, often we have to sell up, and we have to sell down, and we have to sell across everywhere, right? We're trying to convince people, change management, however you want to think about it. One of our jobs is to communicate the value of technology and how it doesn't diminish human capacity, especially in an age of AI. Can you each kind of just briefly, maybe 60, 90 seconds, comment about that, please?
Yeah. So I mean, unlike Gustavo, I don't handle unions, so I'm safe on that side. But I think one of the difficulties that we have, and I think that's a good one, is and you know, with Gustavo, we were just talking just a few minutes before the panel, where I was showing what we've been doing basically with the Port of Galveston in terms of leveraging Google Maps and Waze data to essentially like improve the scheduling of the cruise to avoid basically delays and incidents coming into the different cruise gates and terminals. But you know, it's how do you contextualize the data and how do you make the data tell a story? And I think that's the hardest part, because it's good to like see graphs. And at the end of the day, like any sort of BI tool can support, you know, aggregating data and putting graphs out there. But I think talking about AI, the good thing about AI is that not only actually on the first side, it helps basically making these tools a lot more accessible, because now you can essentially prompt question to actually get answers as opposed to do like complex queries, etc., to get insights. But also with generative AI, you can actually create the story out of the data. And so that's actually our job, is also how do we make it, you know, as easy as possible basically for clients to essentially like communicate with the different stakeholders by creating the right insights and the right stories.
So about 7 years ago, I was part of Miami College in the Idea Center. And over there, I learned that I had to do a lot of translation, and not between different languages, but actually between technology, entrepreneurship, and business. And how do I communicate all that into the academic setup to professors, right? So I started understanding, and I read a book that said machines are becoming better machines, therefore humans need to become better humans. And then I started to dive deep into how to influence people, right? Like how to get to understand their intrinsic motivation. And then based on that, sometimes what works best in our case is to actually ask, how was your weekend? Like, how's your family? And then showing authentic interest would allow them to explore or to be open to, okay, what is it that you do? Like, I remember once I started identifying what I call innovation ambassadors across different departments, and I asked, who's the person that says no the most, right? And they told me this person. And I went to that person and I asked, do you want to go with me to this tech conference in Las Vegas? So when I said Las Vegas, that person was like, yes. So we go over there. And then as we're walking around, the person is like, this is your stuff. And I'm like, what do you mean with my stuff? Yeah, tech, this is your stuff. And I'm like, if you don't adopt whatever solution I bring to the table, I don't exist. Like, my role has no meaning. So then I started chatting with this person about what is innovation, what is the role of technology within the workflow. And then that person was like, oh, okay, now I get it. Now that person is one of our biggest champion within the department, and the role that that person has is key because it's in charge of basically all the operations. So starting, I guess, in our case, like understanding humans will allows us then to be able to translate or understand how we can influence that decision-making process.
Yeah, so I think, and probably similar, I've said multiple times, like our port is mostly a public-private partnership, so I don't have to deal with necessarily unionized employees either. It's actually a bunch of private employees and a private developer and then my own team that we deal with. So it's mainly just explaining technology as a tool. I did a panel on Saturday about AI, and this is explaining that it's a tool. You still need human judgment. This is what we use this tool for. I try to explain any of these new technologies like a hammer. This is what the impact's going to be. Use it to hit a nail. We're using AI and AV on our toll lanes to platoon cars or to platoon trucks, so you use less road space and get them up here more efficiently. It helps with supply chain, just making it very simple. We're using our train-flow technology to better manage crossings further downstream and to do partnerships with the railroad. It's not replacing anybody, it's just helping us do our jobs better.
Wonderful. So, Thibault, I think your point is AI can be really useful for storytelling and analytics. It's very powerful. Gustavo, you're making the case that human intelligence, human emotions, what we need to lean into, and actively practicing change management strategies. So in your case, recruiting someone that wasn't an ally became very valuable. And Kelly, you're talking about the idea of tools, AI as machines as a tool to improve the work that we do, yeah? And all these are sort of facets of change management, or as we talk about this type of work, the one thing I'm learning from my own experience is how important it is to engage people, the people that do the work, right? I'd love for you guys to maybe highlight an example of how technology is not working. So where there's a friction point with the technology piece, and it would be really useful to unpack, is there a human element to it? Is there is there a policy element to it? Like what is causing the friction?
I think for us, it's just the amount of new technologies that are coming online every second of every day. Welcome to CoMotion. There's a whole lot of really wonderful things coming out, and it's just sometimes it's hard to explain what the difference is between two different sets of technology and tools that we're doing, if there's overlap or whatnot. And so what's the best use of taxpayer money in selecting it? I think a couple years ago, everything was digital twin. Now I'm hearing AI with everything, and I'm sure there'll be a new thing. And so it's really trying to figure out what tools are appropriate where, what are things that are being leveraged or can be integrated into existing systems, and just really understanding that landscape so we're not double booked on stuff. I think internally, just answering your question about kind of big organizations, just change management, it's getting everybody on the same page to utilize those tools. It's been a hard part. As an infrastructure department, if I don't get water on board with certain things, it makes it much harder to move forward with a certain technology or whatever it may be. And so it's really that we are drinking from a fire hose. And you also know which many of these companies are going to be around much longer. Are they on a subscription service? Is it on a lease situation? Is it buying it outright? Is this going to be available as integrated in Esri? So it's just kind of digging through that deep web of choices we have to make, and then be able to explain that to the public and to our elected officials as to why.
I think in systems thinking, there is this quote that says, every system delivers the perfect result, right? And then we need to, if we don't like the result, then we need to evaluate what are the components of the system, the links of the systems, and so on and so forth. So I say this because sometimes with AI, people that have not put some effort in order to understand it, think that it's like a magic wand that is going to tell you exactly what to do. And I think it is proven that for the first time, this generation is actually lacking critical thinking in comparison with other generations, right? So how do we actually develop a workforce development, a professional development in order to really understand how these tools, how to use critically these tools so we don't give judgment, what Kelly mentioned, right? So we don't provide the judgment to the tool, but we actually start gaining that judgment and owning that judgment and be better at asking questions, being better at analyzing the data. When I started this role like 5 months ago, they asked me to purchase one of the solutions that we were piloting. And in that process, I identified that our users were not actually using the tool. I started with, give me a report of how many users we have, how often do they use it, have they logged in, yes or no. And then all of a sudden, when I started seeing the historical data in terms of communication, I realized that this one thing that we needed from that tool, it was not being developed. So when I asked the company, by when are you going to have this, they said, we don't have that in our timeline. And I was like, so then I cannot purchase this tool. And they got mad at me, they got mad at them. But it is, like you said, it is the money of our constituents, right? And I need to make sure I do the due diligence process to make the right decisions. So sometimes, like, not having a clear scope and understanding of the challenge at the beginning can influence the whole process.
Yeah, I guess maybe linking up to maybe like the pilot and the procurement question. I think for us as a platform, I mean, technology can only work if the champion or the sponsor basically in front of us really believe in it. I think it's very difficult for a startup or scale-up basically to do like any sort of meaningful work if we don't. Again, it comes back to the story. If we don't really have a clear like KPIs and impacts that we can measure from setting up the technology. So let alone actually procuring a tool that no one understands. So yeah, it's all about again getting the human on board. Technology cannot solve it without the human.
Wonderful. So Kelly, your point was alignment across the organization is really important. You talked about how some of these startups can be ephemeral, right? They're here today, gone tomorrow. You want to de-risk for that. Gustavo, you started out talking about how systems thinking informs your process, how upscaling is really important, and then you pointed out actually unpacking the data to make a decision, right? Right? That's really important as we think through what we do. And Thibaut, you mentioned the idea of the champion, right? So these are all concepts that line up on what we're talking about. But one interesting thing that as we talk about ports, platforms, and partnerships, I always go back to why do governments, counties, NPOs, why do they exist? And my kind of compass is public good, right? The work that we do has to be for the benefit of the public. Can you talk about some of the challenges where you have seen something that you know that needs to be done, but somehow you're unable to get that across the finish line? Like, you know that this needs to happen, but there's either a policy blocker, there is a strategic blocker, there's a dollar issue. Can you talk about things that need to happen but are not happening?
I think, like, for instance, all of the above, Riyadh, just procurement can be a challenge sometimes. So we took a step back and did a request for innovation, but just a request for information process to kind of focus in on what we wanted to, what problems we want to solve, and had firms respond back to that, which helped us quite a bit with procurement and drilling down into certain things. I'd say our biggest thing is like, not just with technology, but also how do we blend the hard infrastructure with it? Like, we know we have a truck parking issue in our port. Like, that's just the issue I just want to bring up. It's parking. But it's understanding how, I think on one end, I think Gustavo said it, and so is Thibaut, that we don't expect technology to replace people. There's still going to be these needs for some of the bread and butter things. Like, I still have to have my truck parking. I can't solve that through technology or whatnot. Now I can have EV charging there. I can have other types of cool bells and whistles at this truck parking, but I still need that. Just like with our autonomous vehicle lane up Intermodal Parkway, and he said to be quick, I'm sorry. But the up Intermodal Parkway, we are putting a real actual concrete lane with that to pair it with that. And so there's only so far that some of the technology is going to get us. We still have to be able to invest in good maintenance of our system and other things. I think realizing that technology is not going to solve all our problems. There will be some cost savings, some efficiencies, but there still will be these other major investments that we have to put into these enhancements to complement the technology.
Yeah, I'll go back to humans in the sense that at the core, I believe that everybody is a good person and is looking for the best interest of either themselves or their families or their unit. So either because they want to make sure they protect their work or they don't do anything that is going to compromise the unit. Sometimes that could get in the way in terms of procedures that are longer of what should be expected, of decision makings that get basically pushed, right? But at the end of the day, I believe that if you, for example, in this last month, I have learned way more than in my past 5 months here at the port, because these convenient spaces, like being able to meet in person with IT, meet in person with the Department of Transit, and so on and so forth, like I've been able to have conversations that you cannot have in a Zoom meeting, right? In a computer, just because you don't have that direct physical contact and understanding, and either like crack a joke in 30 minutes. You can't do that because you're like go, right? So sometimes being able to come to this type of events, especially in Miami, April is like the tech conference. So we had Emerge last week. We had so many different conferences that I've been able to meet different people from different units in the county, that it is so big and could be so siloed sometimes. So this type of events allows us to make those connections and now put a face and put a name and understand what really happens over there and how we can then help influence. So complex, siloed institutions could get in the way, but this is, I think, why we're here doing what we're doing right now.
Actually, can you repeat the question? So I'm sure I'm going to answer it right.
Yeah, so I asked, as you think about tech, people, hardware, software, what are some things that you see that could be challenges that you in the respective organizations? So it might lend itself better to these folks than you, but maybe you could speak to that as well.
Just so we a couple of years back, I mean, it's still happening now, but sort of every fleet owners at the moment, or like all the logistic operators and so on, are setting up sensors on their vans and trucks. The goal is that they want to essentially, because they know that they're scanning the whole city, they want to start monetizing the data. So they want to create basically new revenue stream. And so we worked very closely with a company called DPD, which is essentially same as DHL, UPS, and so on. And they installed basically these air quality sensors on the vans and trucks, basically. And they have one of the best coverage actually in Europe, at least. It was extremely difficult to sell. I think it was one of the hardest data insights we had to sell basically to municipalities, because essentially no municipalities wanted to have very granular air quality information at the street level because it was so bad. And it was not very bad publicity, essentially. So not every information is good to be released, and not every data is worth being shared, yeah.
Wonderful. So you're saying the tension between sort of what should be shared publicly and what shouldn't be shared. And Gustavo, I think when you talk about your experience, you're talking about how critically important human contact is to do this type of work, to do innovation work. Coming from the startup world myself, I personally prefer to meet people all day. I prefer to work with the dev team in person. That's something I love to do. I think, Kelly, your point is kind of like the basics, right? The maintenance, the kind of the OpEx piece needs to really be there. If we don't do that, it doesn't work well. Right. Yeah. So we're butting up, I think, on 10 minutes till the end of our session. At this point, what I think we wanted to do was open it up to Q&A. So if you're going to ask a question, we'd like to take a few minutes to tackle questions. Tell us who you are and which organization you represent, and we'll go from there. Is there anybody that has a question in the audience? Oh, brilliant, sir. Yes.
Maybe just build off what Kelly, your question. You said, oh, like last year or whatever was digital twin, and now it's AI. Why not both? Or are you seeing kind of the opportunity around where digital twin could be really helpful, and again, keeping humans in mind, but where AI might actually further improve the business case or the way you work in a port environment?
Could you share your name and your organization?
Sorry,
No worries.
So my name is Dale from Mobility Foresight, and appreciate a great panel. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're doing both. It's just it can be difficult to, I guess, when I'm being sold something, to know what the latest thing coming maybe the next year is going to be. So at one point in time, TV was supposed to place radio, and it didn't quite. But it is hard to sometimes keep up on the trends. We do have digital twins we have set up on some of our corridor projects or whatnot, and AI is just going to be with us. And also, I think sometimes it's also, and I'll just say this real quick, it's explaining to folks that, especially with AI, it's just an enhancement of tools we'd already been using in many ways, whether it's search engines, whether it's spell check, whether it's design templates or whatnot. And so sometimes it's also making sure we're not missing anything in this world of acronyms and buzzwords that we're in. And so we want to make sure we're staying on top of that. But it absolutely is both. I would have called digital twins probably scenario planning or other things in the past, something different before. So a lot of it's also understanding how, I won't even talk about Gen Z language that I used differently as millennial, but sometimes it is making sure we're not missing anything. But you're absolutely right. It is both.
Anybody want to follow up on that?
So the way I would say, I mean, in my view, digital twin is the actual sort of real world representation. So if we talk about curbside, it actually would be the the curb data itself, and how do you actually use AI is both actually in terms of input. So for instance, like for curb data, I mean, we have so many different formats, right? How do you make that in one format? I mean, AI actually helps a lot, putting any sort of data in one format to another format in terms of integration, but also in terms of on the output and outcome side in terms of explainability. I think this is where it helps a lot. So I'd say the digital twin is probably the one in middle layer, and the AI is, the back layer, but also the front layer for explainability.
Sometimes understanding the audience is important. Like to my director, I might not even mention the technology. I just might mention like what's the outcome, what's the result, what's the impact. And then if she's curious and she asks, then I'll say, okay, this is how we're doing it. This is the technology. This is how we integrate it. But at the end of the day, depending on the audience, is that we adjust the language. So we are here, yes, in a panel of transportation, but also talking about technology. That's why we're mentioning these things. But at the end of the day, are we going to reduce traffic congestion? By how much? In what ways? How are we going to benefit the public? How are we integrating with the city? So basically, sometimes it's irrelevant what kind of technology we're using. More important is the impact, the outcome.
So I'm going to exercise a little personal privilege here. So first, benefit-based selling is what we call that in the startup world, right? So we lead with the benefit, which is, I think, a wonderful way to communicate to non-technical users. I will push back on two things. I feel strongly that digital twins have yet to prove value except in special cases, right? I've been told that Google Maps is a digital twin. I've seen a lot of digital twin technology, and I find most of it suspect. I apologize if I have there any digital twin folks in the room. The other thing I'd offer you is AI, specifically large language models. While people think of them as sort of an incremental innovation, I think this is like a structural change in our society. And what I think it unlocks, and this might be a dramatic example, it's almost like a plowshare for how we used to grow crops. If you think about 10,000, 100,000 years ago, when we thought about farming, a plowshare changed completely the environment, right? The paradigm completely shifted. Large language models have the ability to fundamentally change, right? So for example, some of the folks I'm working with, a small group was able to do something in a week that would cost several $100,000 using this type of technology in a government setting, right? So I just want to share those points. We have time for a few more questions I want to say. Yes, sir. If you'd share your name, organization.
Hi, my name is Asan with Leon Recruitment. My question would be about what is the responsibility of the technology companies who are rapidly dropping their new technologies in our city in relationship to our restrained budget and manpower in making the adjustments needed for that new technology? And I'll give you two case examples. When they were dropping those little like scooters all over Miami and it turned into garbage pretty much. And then secondly, coming over here, Waymo, which released here in Miami during eMerge last week, I saw two working really well over the weekend. One today I finally saw bug out. So right at a construction point where there was cones, a police officer and a construction worker, they didn't know what to do. Waymo literally stopped in a one-lane street from the Miami River coming here, right before I got here, and everybody had to go into opposite traffic to get out of the way of the Waymo. The Waymo came to Miami, right? The way that the construction workers and the police officers set up cones, to define a road in a certain way for people who are humans are obviously going to know which way to go. Whose responsibility is it for that Waymo that was dropped in the middle of our traffic, blocked all that traffic? Whose responsibility is it?
Anybody want that?
Is that too much of a bomb?
I was going to say from a city perspective, we usually have more of a wait and see attitude. We usually pilot things before. It depends on which state you're into. Our state is pretty much allowed. We really don't have much. We can't really tell them no. Scooters are one thing, but Waymos are different. We have to allow those in here. And so that's why I think the communication, the partnership before they deploy a pilot is so important. And then I think on the scooter side, which we had e-bikes and scooters that ended up in the rivers around Texas, I think there's a lot of lessons learned with that, and that we can, I think in that sense, we have to be, we're basically saying we're not with that, allowing that in the city until we can actually figure out a real policy to manage the fleets and their sizes and all those other things, and also even potentially have dedicated space for those to actually be left. So I think it's having good communication with the tech companies to let them know what their expectations are, and then us as cities trying to be, as best we can, somewhat proactive about managing the infrastructure changes that are needed. Because it's not a matter of just dropping a bunch in one city. There's a lot of other things that come along with it that I think a lot of places just weren't prepared for.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, real quick. I represent the Port of Miami, right? I don't represent the city, so I cannot tell you who's responsible for it. But what I can tell you is that that's why we run pilot programs, in order to learn from those type of things, right? And be able to correct. So there is always an innovation going to be a learning curve, and we cannot stop sometimes those things from happening. And there are regulations and there are clauses in order to make sure who's responsible for what.
Yeah, and I mean, in the case of scooters and bikes, I mean, if you take Miami and Miami downtown, the streetscape was just not ready to host these types of vehicles, right? So there's hardly any sort of bike parking or cycling lanes. So yeah, sometimes technology is going quicker than cities, and it's most of the time. But it's also great. It's also great that the role basically of entrepreneurs is to scale technology, and from a city perspective, they're the governance body, right? So they have to adapt technology, but also make it good for the people, and probably pace the technology adoption as well, and make sure that the benefits are greater than the challenges. Yeah.
So I just want to chime in here. I think it's our responsibility. Policy doesn't get made without input. If you really felt strongly about it, you could go to your local city commission meeting, you could go to a county commission meeting and say, what is the intrinsic value of this work that we're doing? This car, the impact for the streets, the jobs that it's displacing, what are the policies that we have around that? I think as concerned citizens, it starts with us. So if you're asking that question, you want to do something about it, that's where I'd go first. Policy is informed by, honestly, 1 or 2% of a population can move a policy, right? If you think about the world that we live in, so I would say it's you. We have time for one more question.
Hi, Fabio Tilleman with Guide and Corp Boca Raton. Interested in the port environment. What are you guys testing in terms of robotics and automation?
Yeah, so again, automation is not a word that we use, but we, for example, for maintenance, right, we start implementing an industrial robot that supports our staff in order to clean like wide open areas. So instead of spending 4 hours cleaning the terminal now, that staff now can focus on more technical, high skill environments that require, that the passenger requires with more hygiene, more frequency, and so on. So we look at things that we can reduce the stress and we can complement the labor that they do. And then we see in ways that we can implement that. So it goes from industrial robots that is cleaning and helping maintenance to how we can now, with IoT devices, audit our crane operations, right? Because our port is at the word leasing. It's the tenant. We are a tenant port. What does that mean? That we lease our space, right, to our terminal operators, both cargo and crew. So we don't actually operate the terminal operations, but we make sure that everything, the infrastructure and the services are in place so they can have the best experience. So through our camera infrastructure, currently one of the pilot companies that we selected through MDIA, we're running AI software that is agnostic to the technology of the camera in order to capture data in terms of cargo visibility, but also traffic flow in order to identify where are the congestion points and take now either analog type of solutions, right, MOTs with the sheriff's office, or to support our capital development and our planning team on what are we going to do from mid to long-term decisions in terms of construction projects, so on and so forth. So that can give you the range of, like, it can be as basic as supporting maintenance staff to software that helps us with future capital development projects.
Perfect. So let me thank our panelists, Thibaut, Gustavo, Kelly. Thank you so much. Thank you for being an audience today, and CoMotion for letting us do this. It's a pleasure. We're going to wrap up. If you have a question, I'm sure you can chat with somebody after we wrap up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to get started with our panel, Advanced Mobility, Scaling Automation Across Air and Ground. And I would like to welcome our moderator, Katie Zender.
Hello, good morning. We are excited to be here. We have, I'm Katie Zender. I work for HNTB. I'm out of our Columbus, Ohio location. And we have a great panel today for you. Yes, we have, yeah, fair, just an average panel. We have experts in public policy, public, what would you say, just acceptance and operations on the AV side. So we're going to talk about how we get from all this autonomy just being a novelty or to being really normal. So the way I wanted to just start was, I think each of our panelists have a really interesting story of how they ended up in this space. And so I'm going to let them do some self-introductions by way of telling their story.
Yeah, great to be here. My name is Daniel Vargas. I found myself in this space around 2014. I was working at Uber in Latin America, launching markets for Uber. And at that time, Uber developed Uber ATG in order to develop their own autonomous vehicle program. That was the first time that I heard about this technology, and I fell in love with it. Towards my end of my tenure at Uber, I worked on a project of building Uber Maps, so sort of like Google Maps, but internally at Uber. And that was my introduction to sensors, to LiDARs, to cameras, and how do you organize fleets in order to collect all that data. My recruiter at Uber went to work at Zoox and called me back, and he said, I think this will be an interesting place for you. So I went to Zoox, the robotaxi company. I worked on their go-to-market team, and our job at that time was to look at the entirety of the United States and understand the markets that would make sense for this product. And I was the first one to drive in a rental car with a GoPro attached to it around Las Vegas. Now Las Vegas is the first market where Zoox is launching a commercial deployment. So brought back those insights from the ground, talked to our software team, talked to our management team, and they accepted. So there we start these deployments into these markets to explore how our vehicle and our technology was gonna drive in these locations. Now I'm currently part of Holon. Holon is Italian design vehicle. It was designed by Pininfarina, which also designs super high-end vehicles like Ferraris and Lamborghinis. So Italian design, German engineered. Our headquarters is in Paderborn, Germany, and is going to be built in the US. So Buy America, Build America compliant. And it's a 15-seater. Well, it has capacity for 15 people, and it's a different use case because it's for public transit. So a lot of what we see is robotaxi and trucking. Our solution is for public transportations. Pass it on.
I'm Jeff Brandis. I joined the Army 7 days after high school, spent 11 years in the military with I ended up being with the 101st in Iraq in 0304 as a transportation officer. Came back, thought I was going to come work for my family business. Sorry, is it not? Is it off? Test, test, test. I just need to hold it closer to my face. Joined the military and then came back to work for my family business, and they promptly sold it. And so I had to figure out what else I was going to do with my life. So I joined the Florida legislature, and just, yeah, it was a random day, random Thursday. So I spent 2 years in the Florida House, and I was part of this incredibly talented team in the Florida, like this class of the Florida House was incredibly talented. They're super talented. In fact, I mean, we have lieutenant governors, we have ambassadors, all kinds of great people came out of that. And so I'm like looking around going, oh my gosh, how do I stand out in a world of really talented people on areas of policy that like I'm just a neophyte in and I don't really know much about. So I decided it was a 4-hour drive between my house in Tampa and Tallahassee, so I would watch TED Talks the entire ride. And so for hours and hours, nobody wanted to ride with me because it was really boring because I would watch TED Talks the entire drive up to Tallahassee until I came across Sebastian Thrun's discussion on self-driving cars. And I was captivated. I thought, this is absolutely incredible. Like, this is, like, having just spent a year in Iraq, having been doing convoys after convoys, I said, listen, it would have made my lives of my soldiers safer and my life safer. And if you think about kind of the future of accidents and what's driving things, this is the next big thing, right? And so I came to my legislative aide and I said, listen, we're going to work on self-driving cars. And he said, you're insane. Nobody, this is 2010, 2011, nobody in the country is talking about self-driving cars, and if you lead with this, they're going to think you're crazy. So I did what any good politician would do, which is I got a new legislative aide who was not nearly as good at talking me out of things. And so we wrote the first set of legislation in the country on, well, let's start this way. We started working on the first set of legislation in the country on self-driving cars. Okay, the only people that were lobbying on self-driving cars at the time was the Google. So I called up Google. I said, hey, Google, I am looking to work on self-driving car legislation. Would you like to help? And they said, You're a freshman legislator in Florida, in the Florida House. Like, we're in California. Thank you very much. Call us in a few years. So then they hung up the phone. And so I, in my, naivety, called them back. And I said, hey, I'm going to work on this legislation anyways. And then I said, I'm sorry if I screw it up. And I hung up the phone. To which Google called me back quickly, and they said, okay, please don't screw it up. We will help you. I'll give you access to Google's legal team. We will help you to think about what the first, what the law should look like. Oh, and we'll bring the cars to Florida, and we'll introduce you to all our senior staff and engineers. So back in 2011, we wrote the first set of laws in the country on self-driving cars. And what made it different was, and kind of related back to my Iraq experience, when I was in Iraq, I read this book called Capitalism and Freedom by Milton Friedman. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a libertarian. Okay, but then I'm thinking about all right, how do you regulate self-driving cars? So of course I go, how would Milton Friedman regulate self-driving cars? And that's ultimately what the law that Florida became, which is ultimately, Friedman would say that the state has essentially no skin in the game, right? That the people that really have skin in the game are the companies themselves and their insurers. And so what made Florida's law different and simple and frankly unique really around the country until it's largely been adopted through the Southeast is you can drive a self-driving car in Florida if you have $1 million worth of insurance by a rated company, right? That is the standard. So when companies would call here after we passed that law, and they'd be like, all right, we're getting absolutely put on the rack and tortured in California. What does it take to do business in Florida? And we're like, well, we have to have $1 million worth of insurance. And they would say, and then what? And then we're like, no, that's it. They're like, well, who do we have to tell? We're like, no. Just have $1 million worth of insurance, and you can operate on Florida's roads. So that led to Voyage and Argo and Starsky and now Google, well, now Waymo and Zoox and a host of other companies that are looking at Florida. But those companies originally kind of started their deployments and their testing all in Florida. Why? Because they're they wanted to go in an operating environment where they didn't have to spend 80% of their budget on legal. And that was what was going on in most of these smaller self-driving car companies, which is they're just in this legal malaise. And in Florida, they could just focus on the technology. So after we passed that, then I was like Mikey from the commercial, Mikey will do it, right, in the innovation space. So then we brought Uber and Lyft to Florida. That took 4 years. Then all the e-bikes, all the scooters, all that legislation kind of came through me over the last decade. And then I got out of legislature in 2022 and started a little nonprofit called the Florida Policy Project, where all we do now is look at nationwide best practices in housing, insurance, transportation, and the prison system. And so we try to figure out what's working best and try to get Florida to copy and paste that. So that's me.
Okay, I'll start with professional pro tip number 1, which is never follow Jeff Brandes on stage. But my name is Tara Andringa, and I am the executive director of a 501c3 nonprofit called PAVE, which is Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. What we do is try to help the public understand and build trust in automated vehicle technology. How I got into this, I kind of like to divide into 2 totally different answers. One is if it's possible to be born into transportation safety, I was. My dad had been a engineer executive at GM for 40 years. So I was the dorky kid in the 1970s when everyone else rode in the way back of the station wagon, that my dad would put the key in the ignition and would literally turn around and make sure everyone had their seatbelt in before he would start the car. So I've been in transportation safety since birth. But then fast forward, I worked in the US Senate for 21 years. I was the communications director for the Senate Auto Caucus, so I've been doing communications and policy and cars for forever. Started PAVE, launched in 2019. I was hired in 2018 to kind of pull it together and recruit members. We have about 100 members that span, everything from OEMs and AV companies to groups like National Federation of the Blind and Mothers Against Drunk Driving and National Council on Aging. We really try to pull together the whole AV ecosystem in a conversation about what do we want the future of transportation to look like. So excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. I'm going to move a little bit because I can't even see you. But, okay, Tara, can you, so we have this situation going on right now where we've got, independent verification of Waymo's safety record saying that there's, when you're driving Waymo, there's a 88% reduction in property damage. There's a over 90% reduction in injuries. But then we also have like AAA survey data saying there's only 13% of people that would be comfortable in an AV. So like, can you discuss for us?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And it's funny because that's actually sort of the answer I always give when people say, where did PAVE come from or why did we start? And that was exactly it. When you look at the actual where the technology is, it's there. In terms of development of AVs, we're there. But when you contrast that to public opinion polls, exactly. What you see is people say, I don't get it, I wouldn't ride in one, I don't trust them. And so that's what we thought. We see a lot of potential in this technology, but if we're going to reach that potential, we need to bring the public on board. We do a lot of data, survey data, precisely for that reason, because if we're going to try to build public trust, where are we right now? And what we have learned is there are two key things that move people: education and exposure. The more people know about the technology, the more they are likely to trust it, say, oh yeah, I get that, that makes sense. And the more I always say, like, if people say if you could, wave a magic wand, what would move people? Get every single person in a Waymo. Like, the more people have experienced the technology, that's the number one greatest way to help people trust it. In terms of, but then the flip side of your answer, the how do we degrade public trust? And I think this is, again, a big part of why my group exists, is there's so much confusion. Right now, we're at this weird place that cars are really pretty sophisticated, and ADAS technologies can do a lot without pointing fingers. Some of the naming is really confusing to people that suggests the car can do more than it can. So we really need to, and I almost want to make it a binary. Either you are in a vehicle, no matter how sophisticated the technology is, if you bought the vehicle today, you are in control, hard stop. Even if it's 2++++3, SA level 3 vehicle, you are the driver. Or again, bright line, Waymo, the car is the driver, and please do not touch the steering wheel. And I really think we need education to help people understand that, because I think people hear, a full self-driving car got into a crash, and that really makes people think, oh, wow, self-driving cars aren't safe. And so we have to, part of it is media training, saying, okay, well, that's not actually a self-driving car, which is really confusing to people. So I think, we really, again, need to continue this dialogue.
That's interesting. I was involved, it's almost a decade now, when it started with this program, Smart Columbus, that the feds were funding. And one piece of it was through Paul G. Allen for Philanthropies, more focused on electrification. And the Columbus Partnership really made an effort to get people in EVs, like tens of thousands of people in EVs over like a few years. And it was interesting to watch the adoption rates in the state from the beginning of the program, through, even now it kind of picked up, and that region is growing faster, and I think that was a big jump to it. So that's interesting. So Jeff, you have said that Florida is the perfect place to deploy AVs, and I think you kind of hinted to some of the policy pieces, but do you want to talk a little bit about why you think that's true?
It doesn't snow here. You want me to go more than that? You have 23 million residents.
You just shocked me by you're such a short answer there. I didn't know what to do.
So you have 23 million residents. You have 140 million tourists. So that's a good place to start. If you think about the game of Risk, right? Think about the game of Risk, right? The key to Risk, in my opinion, is where you begin, right? If you begin in Australia, right, easy to defend, you can grow places from there. Really a good place to start. Not great place to start, Europe. If you start in Europe, you're surrounded by a lot of countries. There's a lot of ways to get attacked, and early on in the game of Risk, not a great place to start. South America's not bad. Africa's not great. But it's about the key node that you start in. And I think Florida, for many AV companies, is the key node to start in, because it is the gateway to South America. It is the gateway to Central America. Miami is hard It's hard. Like, we have chickens that cross the road in Miami, right? There is this, that is like a literal thing here that happens. It is, so you have the panache of a San Francisco kind of level of difficulty. And so people say, all right, well, they did it in Miami. They can probably do it in Orlando. They can definitely do it in Tampa, right? Because it doesn't get harder than here. But also, Florida, it doesn't snow. You have the tourists. You have the density of population. And our cities are actually just an annoying enough distance apart where long distance autonomy really begins to make a lot of sense. And so this is, and frankly, you can drive for 8 hours in this state and still be in the same regulatory environment under the same state law, right? So for those reasons, Florida makes a ton of sense, and why Florida will be the leader in self-driving and frankly in air mobility because of icing and because you can drive all year long, fly all year long here, than every other state in the country, right? While Joby may be doing great stuff in New York, let me tell you, when it's winter, they're coming to Florida.
Awesome. Well, Dan, I assume you agree with a lot of that because you guys are expanding here. So I thought maybe, and you've worked with public agencies like transit with JTA, and then you've also worked with Lyft. I thought maybe you could talk to us a little bit about how to scale and some of the things you're considering and like what you look at and what that looks like.
Yeah, I think in order to scale, there are 3 things that are super important for autonomous vehicle startups or companies. The first one and foremost is the technology. The technology really has to be there. Being able to prove your safety case or have a clear roadmap as to how you're going to be removing the safety driver. I think that's the basis, and you start building from there. Waymo has done a really good job at setting the standard of where should other companies or what should other companies do in order to reach those safety milestones. So technology and safety paramount. The second one is access to capital. And it's really hard to underestimate how cost intensive this industry really is. Let's think about the fleet. These are vehicles, in our case, built from the ground up for autonomy. Other ones are doing retrofitting our vehicles, but the sensor stacks continue to be very expensive, so that's one. Then you gotta operate them. Then you gotta, your team, and the majority of them are software engineers, so pretty expensive people that you have to fund. And then after that, safety operators, your infrastructure that you need to build. So you're doing charging, you're doing storage, you're doing maintenance, repair, and cleaning, which is everything that an Uber driver used to do. You have to do it as a systematic approach to solve for it. So that's the second one. And the third one is definitely public trust. And in 2 senses, public trust in the industry overall, and public trust in the solution that you're providing. So people have to trust the vehicle that you put in on the streets and the solution that you put in on the streets. So I think those 3 are the must-haves. And if you don't have it, those are your main barriers to entry as well.
Awesome. I was wondering if we could hear from everybody about what role like public and private partnerships and bringing different stakeholders together has in this, and what some of the challenges might be there, some of the opportunities. I don't know, Tara, if you want to start.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to kind of take a different. Well, so I'll just start by saying public-private partnerships are essential. You know, it's sort of like it takes a village. It's the government working with industry, working with academia, and kind of all these pieces coming together that make it work. But I assume that they will both kind of talk about, in terms of deployments, why that's critical. So I want to just talk for a second in terms of public trust. Okay, bear with me for a second because this is going to sound strange, but I always like to look at Click It or Ticket, which was a campaign decades ago. You all probably remember it, trying to get people to use seatbelts. And it was literally NHTSA and the auto industry coming together in the name of public safety and highway safety, and it was the biggest behavior change campaign in highway safety we have ever seen. Really drastically drove seatbelt usage. Now, I'm not naive. I know understanding autonomous technology is much more complicated than wear your seatbelt or else you'll get a ticket. So it's definitely more nuanced and sophisticated, but I really do think it's going to take that kind of effort of the public sector and private sector coming together to say, we really have potential here to massively change highway safety. But we all need to work together to make sure that the public understands it and trusts it and really be thoughtful about the way, all the different use cases and all the ways that we can integrate autonomy into our existing transportation system. So I would say that's kind of what I'd love to push for.
Of that example.
I'm just thinking like the click it or ticket. It's the annoying buzzer that goes off in my car if I drive 3 feet without my seatbelt that probably makes me put that thing on more.
My favorite thing is my husband just got a new car, and I'm always like complaining about him not using the blinker because I'm like, you're not communicating with anybody, and now his car like
blinks on its own, huh?
gets gets mad at him too. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, okay, yeah, it does. Yeah, it will do the haptic feedback. It'll be like forcing you back onto the road like you're a terrible driver. Right, yeah, I get it judges me enough. I've got enough things in my life that judge me. I don't need cars to judge me
I just
too,
started
right?
laughing. I was like, oh my goodness.
So look, I mean, I prefer private partnerships versus public-private partnerships, right? And here's my advice to everybody in the room. Preempt whatever you can to the state level. Like, you're going to get tortured enough by cities and counties if you try to do it one by one by one by one, right? Think about, like, just if you drive, like, 20 minutes in this from this point, you're probably going to hit 4, 5, 6 different cities, right? All of them, and this is what we ran into with Uber and Lyft, right? Florida allowed cities to regulate taxis on a city-by-city basis. And so I live in St. Pete. If you wanted to cross the bridge to Tampa, totally different set of rules. Had to have a permit to operate in Tampa, had to have all kinds of different regulation, different insurance amounts. It was death by 1,000 cuts, never going to happen, right? Magically, when we preempted to the state level, then all of a sudden, like, the whole world got easier for them. I mean, they still have to deal with airports, which are their own, like, local governments, but that's how this works. But look, it's unavoidable to deal with the public on public infrastructure. But to the extent that you can preempt and privatize, that's the strategy.
The highway patrol guy that we're working with in Ohio, who gives the example for preemption of, policy that you have to stop when you get to Michigan, when you leave Ohio, if you're riding a motorcycle and you have to put your helmet on, and that, like, if you're driving an AV, you don't necessarily want to, like, have to change, put your little purple blinker on that they're requiring for it's a lot more complicated than
No, that's the thing, and I think it's going to be incredibly evident in long haul trucking, right? That's going to be probably where we'll see a lot of that. In Florida, obviously, we've preempted most of it to the state, but I think long haul trucking there's going to be some of those quirky rules that unless we start forming state compacts, I think that they're going to run into.
Yeah, because they're doing those chicken lights to show if it's operational or not. Not everybody's doing them. So, Dan?
Yeah, I'll answer to this question, walking you all through the ecosystem that we'll have to build in Jacksonville. That's where our first pilot is going to be in the U.S. We're working super closely together with JTA, Jacksonville Transportation Authority. Not4 was here yesterday. He talked about it as well. So, look, in our business case, we have to work with public transportation authorities. They have to work with the federal government in order to get funding for the projects. That makes us have to apply to the regulatory standards that are for our vehicles. So we have NHTSA with the FMVSS compliance, which was built for human-driven vehicles. Now we're bringing our vehicle, it doesn't have a steering wheel, it doesn't have pedals, it doesn't have a rear view mirror. So now I'm not complying with things that were made for humans but were not thought or made for autonomous systems that drive themselves. So that's one. The other partnership that we have in Jacksonville is with the Florida State College at Jacksonville, FSCJ. They have a test track that we're going to be using in order to validate all of our software iterations and that our vehicle is behaving in the right ways. And it is a location where they do, where you could get your driver's license training for driving trucks. So repurposing already existing infrastructure that is there from the public to use it for the benefit of our project. So in our case, it's critical to be having all these moving pieces and all these different parts of the ecosystem working together.
Awesome. Do you also want to, I thought it'd be good if we talk a little bit about infrastructure and some of the hurdles you see there as you try to deploy.
Yes, I think.
Good answer, yes.
The main one is going to be electricity, charging infrastructure. That was one of the main challenges that we had, or that I experienced at Zoox. We got into this multi-year lease, and we thought that we were going to be able to store our vehicles there, to charge them there, and then we go to the city, to the municipalities, and request for permits, and then we come to the conclusion that there's zoning laws, and then there's all these other permits that we will have to get, because the electricity company will have to break all the streets in order to pipe the electricity to our location. So charging infrastructure is super challenging, and it could be a bottleneck for really this technology to be able to go everywhere. So that's one. Data is another one. So these vehicles go out and collect so much data, terabytes of data daily. And once they come back to the depot, you have to get those disks that they collected, send it to the cloud. And if you don't have upload speeds that are decent enough, then your data is going to take a week to get uploaded. And your software engineers need to get access to that data the next day or the same day in order to triage the driving issues that you're seeing on the ground. So data is another key component. So zoning laws and having enough power to supply these fleets are going to be one of the main challenges when it comes to infrastructure. And internally, you have to have a clear plan as to how you want to do these things. And I think Waymo has done a really good job. I've studied their footprint in San Francisco, and they have a hub and spoke model throughout the city where, yeah, they may have one main hub, but they have different locations across the city where you do certain functions of the maintenance and repair or storage. So internally, you have to have a clear idea as to how you want to attack your strategy for infrastructure.
Great, thank you. What about, let's see, I want to talk about insurance just because we're in the middle of drafting some legislation right now, or helping a state with that. And I know, Jeff, that you have a lot of experience, or you've been thinking about this for a lot longer than I have. So I'm curious how you came to the conclusion of what you should do in Florida, and then what you're seeing elsewhere, especially with what's going on with Lemonade and others.
Yeah, so I think the key is to keep it simple, right? Like when you say insurance to legislators, their eyes roll back in their heads. Like most of them can't spell the Office of Insurance, they can't spell OIR. Right, like that, they kind of run into problems when you start talking insurance. If you go anywhere beyond basic level insurance, so you start talking about reinsurance, oh my gosh, heads explode. Like they don't understand any of this stuff. But who is making the large investments in self-driving car world right now, or in this space? It's largely reinsurance industry like Munich Re and some of the other ones that have been the leaders in the conversation in this technology. And so legislators don't understand this stuff. So understand whatever you guys produce, you're going to have a Fisher-Price version that legislators can comprehend, right? And this is key. Is the simpler you can make it, and the more you can tie it to like what Uber and Lyft are doing, the better off you're going to be. that's a great way to think about how to say, like, listen, and in Florida, which is amazing, Florida hasn't changed its auto insurance laws since 1973, right? The average auto accident in America with injuries is a $25,000 event. Florida, in its infinite wisdom, requires you to have $10,000 worth of insurance. And by the way, 20% of our drivers drive without insurance, and 23% drive with just the minimum. So the game of Florida roulette is every time you get in your car, and if you get into an accident, if you're going to be hit by somebody who is uninsured or underinsured, right? But then if you get hit by a city bus in Florida, then you can get up to $250,000 worth of insurance, and then they're capped out, right? Because now you've got sovereign immunity laws that hit them. So if you get a choice to get hit by one of these vehicles and ever hit to take off your leg, you want it to be a self-driving car. Because if you get hit by a regular automobile, you have the 50-50 shot that they're either going to have zero insurance or only $10,000. If you get hit by a city bus or a garbage truck that's operated by the city, you're going to get $250, and then they're going to disclaim. Well, they're going to say, "Oh, sovereign immunity, we're good." But that's where the argument helps. Like when you can make that type of argument to legislators, they're like, "Oh, I can understand that. That's simple enough for me." And so that's where I would say, in your conversations about insurance, like keep it simple, don't overcomplicate it, make it be a regulated carrier by the state, right? So because they want to feel like control. Beyond that, keep it simple.
That aligns with what I think all the insurance companies are, they're wanting to handle as much as possible themselves and coordinate with all the other vendors,
I think the interesting thing is insurance will be the key differentiator between self-driving car technologies. And ultimately, one of the key reasons some are able to offer it at a cheaper point. If you talk to Uber and Lyft today, I know you've had these conversations, and I'm sure you could probably quote the numbers, insurance is a huge portion of every dollar I spent on a per mile of ride. It's astronomical. And in some states like New York, insane. And in fact, the main provider of insurance in New York, literally went out of business for their taxi cabs. Went under and left everybody panicking of how we're going to make this thing work. So I think the key differentiator in these technologies is ultimately going to be how safe are they? And so the incentives for the companies is actually to make the car safer so their insurance price goes down and their cost per mile goes down as well.
Yeah, and I've heard about a lot of the kind of the mess in New York there and how they're trying to unwind that. But it also is interesting. I was reading how this Lemonade is working with Tesla, and they have an API that connects the status of the vehicle, whether it's in full self-driving or not, with the insurance company. And then if it is in full self-driving, they basically are charging half as much for those miles, rate-wise, which honestly, with some of the safety stats, it seems like that's probably going to be lucrative for them. But it's awesome. That's super helpful to hear your background and everything on that. Okay, well, let's see. Tara, why don't we go back to you and talk about when there was the ADS, and you had all these acronyms that you were trying to help people understand, and I know you worked with JD Power, you worked with all these different groups. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And we were going to talk about air mobility in here, but we ended up not. But if you have thoughts about moving forward on the ground side and then also on the air side.
Yeah, so Katie, what you're referring to, we joined, and it was 6 organizations, and I don't know if I'm going to embarrass myself. It was AAA, JD Power, SAE, IHS, and I'm sure I'm forgetting.
Consumer Reports.
Consumer Reports, National Safety Council, and PAVE. We formed this coalition. We created this thing called Clearing the Confusion. And where it came from was AAA had done this study looking at naming of features. And I can't remember the numbers off my top of my head. It was 32 different names that auto emergency braking was using, and it was really hard for consumers. And what their study found is it was really hard when consumers were looking at vehicles to compare apples to apples. And so we came up with names that both were pretty self-evident, that when you heard automatic emergency braking, you kind of knew what it did. In no way, I want to really be clear, we were not trying in any way to stop manufacturers from using their proprietary naming, but what we were hoping is when they called their product Super Cruise or Blue Cruise or whatever their name was, that they would also say, the plain language for it. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, that we really see danger in people not understanding what features are, how to use them appropriately. And yeah, so that was just kind of a effort to help people understand mostly ADAS features, and then how they differentiated from full autonomy. In terms of your question about air mobility, I think there's one way that it's similar and one way that it's really dissimilar. In terms of public understanding and acceptance, I'm all for transparency, and the more that we can talk to the public and help people understand it, the better, because I do think there's a lot of confusion. On the other hand, for the most part, I think drones will not be, why it's so important with drivers is because they are right now in control of the automobile, and so if they're misusing features, it creates a huge safety hazard. So I would say, in terms of consumer education, that a similar effort would be useful, but not as much in terms of how to control, the technology.
Okay, cool. I think we're going to take a couple audience questions in a little bit here, if you guys have any. Oh, sure, we can start now.
Yep.
So the question to the panelists, as we see that Waymo is very successful at scaling, right? 500,000 megabytes per week. We know that freight, the economics is going to work. Now, specifically in transit, what needs to happen, and when is it going to happen, so that it can start scaling from pilots to actual commercial deployments?
I'm going to give an answer that really doesn't answer your question at all, but this is the way I want to answer it too, then I'll get to that. You're right, and I kind of said this earlier, like the technology's here. Waymo, where it can operate is operating, trucks where they can operate are operating. The piece that we're really lagging, well, two things. We're lagging behind in public education, which is why I do what I do, but in regulation. I mean, like Jeff said, Florida is great, but there are a lot of states, actually, this was a topic we were going to address, and I'm going to leap ahead and go ahead and answer it because I feel really strongly about it. Okay, on my soapbox here. We are at a crossroads. AV technology is coming hard stop. And a lot of states are looking at it and sort of saying, oh, I don't get it, I don't trust it. Like, let's wait this out and see how it goes, and then we'll decide if we're going to, pass laws to make AV technology available here. It is coming, and the U.S. has a choice. Are we going to be a leader here or are we not? And if we don't, then trust me, China is like forging ahead full speed. And if we want the U.S. to be a leader here, we have to create a place where companies can test and deploy and succeed. And so I spoke to the National Conference of State Legislatures a couple months ago, and that was I feel like it should be a bipartisan thing. If we need to create a template or a place where the U.S. can show leadership here. So I think part of the answer, which gets into your transit question, we need to have laws and regulations that allows states to do this, and it really becomes a national security issue. And then even bigger, we need leadership on the federal level. A lot of states are doing great work, but we really need NHTSA to create a framework for, so that it's not this patchwork of that Katie was saying, you can drive through Ohio and then stop, at the state borders. That's just a crazy way to operate.
Can I disagree? Good. So.
Awesome.
Oh, good. No, debate makes great.
I know you're trying to insert some
it makes better
controversy.
panels.
Yeah.
So I'm
Okay, go for it.
No. I'm not disagreeing wholly. I'm disagreeing mostly. Here's the thing. Politicians are scared of everything. They're scared. Anything. if you think about one superpower that a politician should have, it should be curiosity. And most of them are not that curious, right? Most of them, like they're getting into this. This is a brand new topic for them. And you're telling them like, all right, we're going to do self-driving. Oh, and we're going to do it in transit. And they're like, whoa, first of all, like, that's my poor people. I'm really concerned about them. And, like, you know, give me the 25 ways it's going to go wrong, right? What you need is a test state. What you need is one state to show leadership and then to say, listen, Florida did it. And once that happens, then it begins to spread throughout the Southeast. And then when you say, listen, you know, the traffic accidents or whatever else is 1/3 over a series of years, or 1/3, 1/2 in these vehicles with these people with this experience in this state, that's a major state like Florida, then all of a sudden it begins to be infectious, right? Because now all of a sudden you're literally killing your people to not have this, but you have to show it in one state. They think of 50 states as 50 different laboratories, all running different experiments, right? If you go to the states and say at the one time and say, we're all going to run the same experiment at the same time, they're going to go, no, we're not. No, we're not. First of all, half of us are just going to say no out the gate. But if you can get one state to say, we'll run the experiment and we'll show the other 49 states what works, that's the secret.
But then you also get to your point from before when Katie first asked you why Florida, and you said, well, there's no snow. I mean, this is just a really micro point, but if you know, it's a question we hear commonly, like, can they operate in snow? Can they operate in ice? Can they operate? Like, I feel like that's part of the reason why we really need to have tests and deployments everywhere, is because these vehicles can't just know how to operate in Florida's weather and Florida's highway system. And
no, I agree. Like, you've got to put. You can test in other markets, but you've got to deploy in one. And there is that concentration benefit and that clustering benefit that begins to multiply, right, exponentially when you have one state they're deployed in regulatory environment that understands what they want and understands what they need and is working through the hard problems, right? So that the state's law enforcement people can go to one place and they can have a conversation with their law enforcement and their firefighters and other organizations about how this works, and they're transportation disadvantaged, right? Fight the battle one time, don't fight it 50 times. And if you're dealing with cities, thousands of times, no, fight one battle one time and bring all the resources you can and win it.
Dan, do you want to pick sides?
I'll jump on Jeff bandwagon here. I think we need wins on the pilot programs, at least one. And we also need a vehicle form factor that is different. So we don't see a lot of buses that are autonomous. Most of the application has been for other industries. So we need a vehicle form factor that makes sense. There has been a lot of shuttle programs, but a lot of them are pretty slow, 15 miles per hour. The public is gonna go nuts if that's the kind of quality of service that you're getting. So you need the form factor, you need a win. I think everybody in the public sector is waiting to see what happens with JTA and with NAT4, and to see if he's successful, in order for other transportation authorities to say, yes, that's the future and that's how you do it. So you need a blueprint. One blueprint could really open the door for the rest of them, and we need contracts that then could be utilized by other transportation authorities so that they don't have to replicate the system every time you're going to try to do it. So I think those are the things that are needed.
And I have to go back to your question. I think transit is changing, right? Transit's changing because people want to go point to point. Like in Florida in the summer, it's freaking hot. I don't want to walk a mile. Like, I don't, right? And so I'm not going to do that in the summer. So I need a point-to-point destination. And so I think when you get like Cybercab and when you get Waymos and when you get Zooxes and things of that nature that can take me point-to-point, transit changes. And so the question is, like, and I posed this with back when Uber and Lyft were coming out. I was like, if we got rid of the last hour of busing, could we operate Uber and Lyft point-to-point all night long? And the math worked, right? I could subsidize those rides point-to-point for those people because for the most part, those buses are driving around empty. right? And so if you kind of took a look at the depreciation, the road usage, the driver time, all the fuel, the insurance, all of that, the math worked to just subsidize Uber and Lyft rides. And I think that's how we need to be thinking about this.
I agree with Jeff here. I think there is, Arlington, Texas does not have public buses. So what did they do? They went to May Mobility and said, what if we try an on-demand public transportation for our city? So you could go point to point within a specific geofence. So you're not operating the typical buses, you're not operating a train, you're operating a very different kind of public transportation, and that's something that transit authorities, very few of them have ever tested. So I think we need testing in this on-demand approach, and if it makes financial sense for public transportation to adopt it.
I kind of feel, though, that, I feel, what's the metaphor I'm looking for, like the cat, or the, cat's already out of the bag. Like Austin, Texas, and Chandler, Arizona, and LA and San Francisco, like they're already deployed. I mean, Waymar, I've lost track. There are 12 deployments across the, if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, I think it would have been different. It's like, it's already there. Like, we can't say, like, everybody take it back, we're just going to Florida. Like, given that we already have deployments, and then I've lost track of how many states have already passed laws, given that fact, I feel like we are better off with all states, and I think, again, like I said, I worked in the Senate for 21 years, and I'm always thinking of, back then, the issue was CAFE, fuel economy rules, and like California had different standards than everyone else, and it made it impossible for companies. You can't make a different vehicle in one state than the rest of the country. And that's what we're hearing a lot from like our AV trucking members at PAVE. It's really hard when you have cross-country routes, and in every state there are different laws and different regulations, and you literally can't do this. So I feel like, given that we've already passed the point that we don't have one, lab situation, that it's really important that and again, I would go to the importance of national leadership here too.
So I think transit and trucking are your hardest areas because of public unions. By far, they're, because they get a vote and the cars don't. And so the public unions are going to push back hard. But so that's the big challenge, right? When you think about where you're going to see autonomy first, it's agriculture, right? It is the fact that you're going to have most of the farms in 5 years will be massively AI-driven agriculture, on-demand combine harvester that is no human in, and it's being teleoperated or telemonitored from someplace else, right? That is the future of how we're going to feed America, right? Why? Because easier operating environment, lower regulatory costs, lower. I mean, nobody cares what happens on the farm, right? The big challenge, like John Deere has, is like nobody can fix their trucks anymore, right? Because they're too much technology, and so therein lies the big challenge in ag. Long haul trucking, like it's the future. Like nobody wants to be a truck driver. No kid comes up and is like, I want to be a truck driver when I grow up. It just isn't a profession what people want to do. And you can make $150,000 a year driving a truck, but like all you're doing all year long is driving a truck. It's a really tough life to be on the road that much.
It's interesting you say that because yesterday I was talking to somebody here who's agency leader in Illinois, where John Deere is, and they have been having meetings with John Deere about their operation and how to improve it, and taking lessons from everything that they're doing in that farming space. But I think we have another question back here, and since it's got everybody riled up, let's just keep going with the questions.
Yeah, great panel. Thank you for all the information. Is there a role for the city infrastructure in all of this? Like, well, we have seen some protocols, vehicle, city communications. So that's one way from the technology side. But from the city perspective, what can a city do to be autonomous friendly or assisted friendly?
So, okay, and would kind of answer that two different ways. And I do not represent a company, but a lot of the AV companies are members of ours, so I hear this a lot. Most, like Waymo, from what I've heard them answer that question, is they would say anything that a city would do for a human driver is all an autonomous vehicle needs. Clear signs, clear road markings, fix potholes, like anything you would do for a human driver is what an autonomous vehicle needs. Connectivity is a whole other issue, but most of the AV companies deploying right now are not, it's that they can operate without special infrastructure. In terms of a city preparing, though, and all the companies, and this is something my group is working on, like all of the companies have outreach programs to first responders, and that they talk to first responders and teach them how to interact with autonomous vehicles. What I would love to see is standardization, because as the number of companies deploying grows, it's not feasible to say, okay, there are 12 different companies deploying and you have to learn the system for each of these 12 vehicles. And one of the, again, I kind of think in metaphors, but one of the comparisons I've heard, okay, I'll try to make this short, but my group runs this thing called AV Safety Info Share. We have our 4th one this coming May. And the goal is we bring all the AV companies together and have a conversation about where are best practices, where were areas that we can work together. And it's based on Aviation InfoShare has been going on for decades, and has really gotten to the point that any airline you get on, it doesn't matter what it is, you hear the same spiel. Like, a mask will come down, put your own mask on before assisting others, and it's really standardized. And I would love to see that kind of effort across the autonomous vehicle industry, that when a first responder gets there, here are the things you do, and you don't have to learn a separate system, which I've kind of gotten off your question. But yeah, I think that that's sort of, training first responders, and that kind of effort, most AV companies would say, is more critical than special connected infrastructure.
I was talking to someone from NVIDIA who is, they do a lot of the tech that goes into the vehicles, and she was saying they really do just want to be self-sufficient and make sure that the pavement markings are clear, and because they don't want to have to rely on somebody else for the safety of their vehicle. But then at the same time, for this policy and legislative work that we're doing with one of the states, we are engaging quite a bit with some of the cities, especially some of the larger ones that have concerns about curb management and how we're going to address a variety of those issues. So I think they have a big role in just, there's a number of aspects that we want to make sure are coordinated because of how the preemption would work. I mean, Jeff referred to that from the state level down to locals, and then I was also wondering, Jeff, your thoughts on federal preemption for a state where you guys are already so far ahead.
I'm not really worried about the feds, right? I mean, listen, no offense to my federal partners in the room here, but if we would call the federal government glacial if glaciers weren't moving so fast. I think that their policy changes are so slow that the states are just racing around them, right? Which is why I think for self-driving trucking, once you get, we should, where I would be telling my colleagues to be was we need a Texas to Florida compact. With this, we need a Southeast compact, and we need to establish that and have common rules, and then just show everybody else how to make this work. Right? Congress can't get anything done, right? So asking them to do something bold is radical, right? They're just not going to do it, and especially because the unions are there, that have a huge oversized influence in Congress. Good luck, right? They're really going to struggle. But ultimately, the trajectory of this thing is it's happening, right? It's going to happen. The safety numbers bear it out. The economics bear it out. So it's just a matter of time. But, there's a great quote about, Churchill said about Americans is that we tend to do the right thing after we've exhausted all other options, right? And there is no place that shines more than legislators in Congress, right? And ultimately what you're going to see is they're going to resist most of this stuff. It's going to be very successful in certain regions, but ultimately, they will exhaust all the other options of fighting it, and they'll get to a point where there are just literally are not enough truck drivers, and it's a huge problem, or and these other areas will start failing, and then they'll ultimately have to kind of come along, but don't expect them to lead with the right thing.
I am hopeful, though, that there will be a federal framework soon. A couple months ago, there was the first National AV Safety Forum in the DOT headquarters in Washington, and it was interesting to hear NHTSA and the DOT hinting towards a national framework for regulating autonomous vehicles. So
how long have they been teasing that, though?
I think with this, with the team that is in place today, I'm hopeful it could happen faster, and also the technology is catching up, so they can no longer go around it.
It's going to be interesting to see how these all end up fitting together.
Clearly, there's a bottleneck between new technology and old infrastructure because we're trying to place new technology on top of an 80-year-old highway system. Turn over.
On the bottom.
Can we disagree before the question ends?
Yeah. Test, test.
It sounds like the complication is a bottleneck in placing new technology in old legacy systems. The old legacy system being the highways and the roads. But it did take an act of federal, like Eisenhower signing the Highway Act, which is why I know from Miami I can get to Washington D.C. off I-95. Obviously, after 80 years now, it's so congested. It's awful. I'm a Miami person and I never want to get on the road anymore. But I'm a Florida man, so you're gonna have to pry the keys out of my old hands when I'm an old man, right? I'm never going to go autonomous completely, in some kind of federal framework. My question isn't about what you guys have been talking about in the ground, per se, automation. Air. I grew up watching the Jetsons and Back to the Future too, and I've been waiting for flying cars my entire life. Now, today, you're starting to see single-seat drone operators building the technology. Before it turns into a strange patchwork of 100 million different things in 30 years from now, do you guys today think about, let's put in maybe only autonomous, like, flying vehicles for us? Because while I wouldn't give up my keys for my car, I've never flown a drone, and I think I would do it autonomously. So what do you guys think about that, like skipping to the next technology where you're not putting tech on old infrastructure because it's the air?
Yeah, so one of the fascinating things about aviation and what makes it so different for states and cities is that most cities and states don't own the air, right? The air is all federally regulated. And so ultimately, like as slow and as much as we make fun of the federal government, like this is on them. They've got to figure out how to make that system work. But we've only got to go to one person. We don't have to go to hundreds, right? What we've got to think about is, all right, what are the zoning laws? How are we going to get the power to these facilities? How are the airports going to handle them? Because most people still want to go to the airports, and that's the kind of primary use case for Ubers, Lyft, autonomous vehicles, and air taxis, right? It's all about getting to the airports for the most part. And so, but in some ways, we're lucky that it's at the federal level, because they will eventually figure out, they'll have to, and there's much less union activity at that level because it's kind of competing with robo-taxis, not with trucking and kind of the other areas where the unions are typical. And frankly, the unions actually kind of like it because it gives them more jobs on the maintenance side, right? So there's a weird thing going on in aviation where it's actually in many ways easier once they kind of get these certified aircraft than the long-haul trucking and some of the other areas of autonomy.
But why would I have to go to the airport? I'm talking about my personal vehicle, a vertical lift off from my backyard or out of my condo garage.
Sure. So
Does it alleviate all the traffic?
because everything that once you get 10 feet off the ground, you're in federal airspace.
Right.
Or 100 feet off the ground. Let's say 100 feet off the ground.
Does it
You're
make it easier for that? So instead of having all these patchworks and crazy things you guys have going on, one system.
right, except for, are you a pilot? Are you a licensed pilot? Right.
So it needs to be anonymous.
Right. It's got to be autonomous, and the feds are going to have to set that system up.
And most of the manufacturers are not going straight to autonomous. The vast majority are doing piloted because of some of the complexities of takeoff and landing, especially in urban areas. But I think I'm looking at your watch, and I think we're almost out of time. So I wanted to just ask each of the panelists, if you look out a few years, I don't want to go too far out because I feel like this is changing so much, but what do you think one of the things that we need to focus on to move things forward might be, just to close us out, or give us any final thoughts you have?
Yeah, I could start. I think we need more driverless deployment. We need to normalize the technology. People need to see it on their streets in order to start believing in it. I live here in Miami. I see Waymo and Souks testing every day. Sometimes I look to my left, there's a vehicle without a driver, and that's the sort of normalization that we need in other cities for the technology to be adopted more broadly.
Let's see. There's a lot of ways we can take it. Let's just take it on the political front, right? Don't expect your politicians to rush into this stuff. Understand where their challenges are. They're facing the unions that are freaking out about this issue, and there's going to be some pushback. So while the technology may be viable, while we may be able to show all the ways the math works on this stuff and how we're going to save lives and everything else like that, the cars don't vote. People vote. And at the end of the day, politicians listen to the people that vote. So we have to be able to show people where this technology is working, why it's working, and where it can do. And it's going to take the leadership of some states, right, to make this thing work at scale for the other states, especially the blue states, which is going to be the hardest states to adopt. Most of this innovation will happen in the Southeast. Whether it be aviation, whether it be long-haul trucking, and whether it be robotaxis. Florida will be the #1 state in the country for all of that in 5 years. We're 5 years away, right? If you think about it in terms of decades, think about it like this. 2010 to 2020 was the decade of the shared economy. 2020 to 2030 is really the decade, I think, of electrification, where electrification makes sense. 2030 and beyond is the decade of automation. Right, the amazing thing is, as each one of those things kind of goes into this massive Venn diagram, right? If a car is shared, it actually makes sense for it to be more electric. And a shared electric car, if you want to get maximum utilization, really makes sense to be autonomous. Vehicles are the asset that we only use 4 to 5% of the time. A huge depreciating asset for most families on their books. The math will ultimately make sense to move to AVs. At least go from a shared AV for a lot of vehicles. Like, I don't think that you're going to get to apocalypse in Florida, like where everybody's like nobody has a car, right? And they call when the hurricane comes, they're like call in Lyft because an apocalypse is upon us, right? So I don't think that's going to happen. So, but I think people do go from 3 cars to 2 cars to 1 car, and a shared vehicle that I'm renting for my mission on a per mile basis that is everything bundled in: electricity, driver, insurance, maintenance, cleaning, entertainment, all in a bundled mile is the future of where we're going, and Florida's going to be leading it.
I guess I have to give my board of directors would fire me if I don't give the answer that we need public engagement to build public trust. If the public, we started off saying, if the public doesn't understand these, says I would never get in one, doesn't use them, we're never going to reach the potential of greater safety, greater mobility, greater efficiency, all this stuff. So we really need to have an engagement program with the public to make sure that we're getting the most potential we can out of this technology.
We were looking at a headline from 2000 yesterday, this morning, about how, it was asking, is the internet a failed experiment? And there were, concerns. So obviously they had a little education to do on the fact that it's okay to put your credit card on, in the internet and all that stuff. So I feel like we got the same thing going here. But thanks so much. You've been a great audience, and we've had a great panel. Please help me thank the panel.